Our next speaker is going to be Najib Zamani, and he studied law at Radboud University in the Netherlands, where he's currently also working as an assistant professor of European and international economic law. And he currently pursues his PhD there in the field of international trade law and European law. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Are we naive free traders? That's a question that pops up into my mind lately quite often. And if we have to believe the former Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, we are not naive free traders. In 2017, he mentioned in a speech that the European Union and we as Europeans are not naive free traders and that we are ready to protect our interests. Therefore, within the ambit of investments, in 2017 there was this proposal for the screening of foreign direct investments, and that concentrated on inbound investments, so investments coming from third countries. And that proposal was subsequently adopted in 2019, and it is amended now in 2026. However, nothing was said about the screening of outbound investments. So far, the outbound investments were left out. And the review of outbound investments is equally important. And that is also the core of my paper. In my paper, I have looked to the review of outbound investment screening, whereby I look to the emerging approach of the Commission, which can be seen in the European Economic Security Strategy, which was adopted in 2023. And then there was a white paper in 2024, and finally there came this Commission recommendation in 2025. And the first question is obviously, why do we need to screen or review these outbound investments, so investments made by European companies into third countries? And according to the Commission, the main rationale behind the screening of outbound investment is the fact that we have to prevent the leakage of technology, sensitive technologies. And then I look to the approach of the Commission with regard to the screening of outbound investments, and you can find this approach in the white paper, in the European Economic Security Strategy, and in the Commission recommendation. And I look to this approach through the four classical dimensions of a law. So the first one is the personal scope. So what kind of investments, what kind of transactions are included in the review of outbound investment screening? If you look to the approach of the Commission, then you will see that the Commission says a wide range of outbound investments must be reviewed. And then the Commission provides a non-exhaustive list of transactions. And this list mainly repeats the rather well-known transactions. So it's about mergers, it is about acquisitions, asset transfers, joint ventures. So that these transactions should be reviewed according to the Commission. And then if you look to the material scope, the Commission says, well, we have only to review this type of transactions when they are undertaken in these specific three sectors. So advanced semiconductors, AI, artificial intelligence, and quantum technologies. And the reason for this is because, according to the Commission, the whole reason behind screening outbound investment is to prevent the leakage of technologies. And the territorial scope of the review, as it is apparent from the documents of the Commission, that it is a country-neutral approach. That means that a priori, member states are not required to focus on specific countries, so like China or the United States or other countries. However, the Commission in its recommendation provides the opportunity that each member state, so on a member state level, sets its priorities. So the Netherlands can, for instance, say, we will focus on these outbound investments in China, for instance. So we have some experience with ASML and Expedia in Nijmegen, while Germany might focus on other countries. So there is this possibility, but that is on member state level, not EU level. Finally, if you look to the temporal scope of the review, the Commission notes that transactions completed since the 1st of January 2021 can be reviewed, which is quite far-going. So this is the approach of the Commission, and then I look to this approach from the angle of geoeconomics. And geoeconomics is a term which is used yesterday, and I think today it will also be used again quite often. And as mentioned also yesterday, it was used by Luttwak, which means geoeconomics is the use of economic instruments to pursue these security geopolitical interests. So we see a shift whereby countries use their trade and investment policies to pursue these geopolitical and security objectives. And there are also this Blackwell and Harris, they wrote quite a nice book about this, the economic statecraft it's called, about this, and they also say it is the use of economic instruments, or like tariffs, what for instance President Trump does, to pursue this geopolitical and security interests. So this is the angle from which I looked into the approach of the Commission. And if you look to this cartoon, it is about, it's the economy stupid. Some of you may remember it. It is a phrase used by President Clinton in the 1990s when he ran for presidency. And he used this phrase to emphasize the importance of the economy. And I think nowadays it is not anymore the economy which is the most important part, but it's the politics. So it's actually, to be more precise, geopolitics. So it's all about geopolitics. And if you look to this approach of the Commission with regard to the review of outbound investments from the angle of geoeconomics, my conclusion is that the European Union is underestimating the strategic importance of outbound investments. Because the outbound investments, reviewing them, not only they prevent the technology transfers, so the transfer of technologies or know-how, but they also reduce economic dependency. There's also something we talked yesterday about it, and it prevents building the strategic sectors of other countries. And there's actually, in China, they have this Horizon 2025 program, I think, or Made in China 2025, where they said, it is our goal, and that the strategy was published 6-7 years ago, where China outlined that their goal was to reduce the gap in technology with the West in 2025. Therefore, through these outbound investments, but also inbound investments, China tries to rebuild its strategic sectors. If you look then to the review of outbound investments in the approach of the Commission, then I think there are a couple of things which are quite disappointing, because the European Union shows it is still quite naive. And the first thing, it is a disclaimer. We have to keep in mind it is only a white paper, it is only a recommendation. So it is not a regulation, it is not a directive. Nevertheless, these documents are still important because of expectation management. So it sends a signal to other member states, it sends a signal to third countries, and they set also the bar quite low. Well, if you look then to these 4 dimensions which I discussed, the personal scope, the first thing which is apparent, it excludes these portfolio investments. So we have direct investments and portfolio investments, and the argument of the Commission is portfolio investments, they do not provide this controlling interest to the shareholders, therefore it is not necessary to review them. And I think that is quite not a good argument, because through these portfolio investments, countries can build up their strategic sectors. So capital can be used to attract, to build these strategic sectors. And that's actually also what the European Union has done. Attracting, I mean, in 2010, the European Commission published its investment policy, whereby the Commission said we want to attract these inward investments because we can build our economy with it. And another thing, a problem with the personal scope, is that the hybrid financial instruments, or like convertible bonds, are also not taken into account. So there are, at the start, they are a bond, it is but they can be turned into shares. So at the end of the day, you have again this problem with the controlling interest. So it is a bond, it is but it can be turned into equity and therefore shares. With regard to the material scope, I think these sectors are too narrow, because if you look to the material scope, it's only about advanced semiconductors, AI, and quantum technologies. And this is according to the recommendation. If you look to the white paper, in the white paper, biotechnologies was also included. But in the recommendation, the Commission dropped biotechnologies. And finally, the territorial scope. as said, the Commission adopts a country-neutral approach. So the Commission is not providing any guidance to the member states as with regard to the question which countries, so investments in which countries should be screened. Well, they also provide the opportunity to member states to make their own mind, to make up their own mind, to set their own priorities. And I think this is, again, not a good course of action because, first of all, naming and shaming is important in this regard. So if the European Commission on EU level says China is a problem, then that sends a very strong signal towards China, and it's also good for the European Union that all member states agree on that. And that's also the approach of the United States. So the United States, I looked at that a couple of years ago, have also this approach whereby they look to the countries of concern. So on federal level, they have pointed out which countries are problematic. And I know the European Union is not a federal state like the United States. Nevertheless, I think it can be very helpful to have also this list. And there is this risk of circumvention. So if each EU member state has its own priorities, then you can imagine that EU companies can channel their investments into third countries to the more favorable destinations. And finally, the temporal scope, it leads to legal uncertainty. I mean, it's quite far if you say transactions completed on the 1st of January 2021 can still be reviewed, whereby the Commission also does not explain what are the consequences of the review. So should a merger be dissolved, the Commission does not say anything about that. Then, the conclusion, yes, in my mind, with regard to the review of outbound investment screening, we are still naive. And if the Commission adopts the current approach in a regulation or a directive, we risk to make the same mistakes as with regard to the foreign direct investment screening regulation, whereby we saw in 2019 there was no obligation for member states to screen, and now only in 2026 there is this obligation, and there was also no harmonization on EU level. And it takes also too long, and the approach is too narrow because it covers only a small number of sectors. So the ultimate conclusion is if the Commission advances on this way, we risk to repeat the same mistakes. And in my paper, I also look to the limits, and I don't know how many time I have left. We look to the limits of international economic law, which allows member states to screen outbound investments. As far as I can see, international economic law does not place any limits on it, because the GATS, that's the most important agreement, that is concerned with inbound investment screening, not outbound investment screening, because the GATS ensures market access and non-discrimination. Thank you very much.